I can have your attention, order, and welcome to meeting number 13. C'est le jeudi 29 septembre.
It is Thursday, September 29th, 2022, and this meeting is being televised. We also have people on video conference.
Minutes from the previous meetings. Are there any questions or amendments? Everything's clear. Tout le monde est correct avec...
Everyone is fine with that, Mr. Julian?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to clarify for the issue of having the flexibility around the 2 annual salary increases to regular employees, a decision that we made on June 16th, that does not apply to bonuses currently.
It does not apply to
Bonuses.
That's right.
That is
Thank you.
correct. That's
Thank you.
Very good. Now, before going to number 2, I'm going to welcome Ms. Finley and Mr. Scheer, our 2 new members. Welcome and congratulations. And just to clarify, which one of you 2 is going to be the official spokesman?
I
Ms.
believe
Finley?
that would be me.
Okay, very good. We just wanted to...
That's right.
My condolences. Very good. Thank you and welcome. Now we'll move on to item number 2, business arising from previous meetings. Oui, Madame de Bellefeuille.
Yes, Ms. de Bellefeuille. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would also like to welcome the new members. I draw your attention, and first of all, I wanted to thank you for the note explaining to us what happened with there was the letter, and we had asked for an explanation of why the French letter arrived several minutes after the warning was issued in English, and some people did not receive it at all. So I consider that what was explained to us is clear, and I understand that everything was put in place to avoid that happening again. So I think it's quite clear. I don't know if anyone else wants to confirm from what I read, and what I conclude from this note is that everything's been put in place to ensure it doesn't happen again. I think that Mr. Patrice, the Sergeant at Arms, might confirm what happened.
La question était de...
The question was as to what happened with the alert that was issued, but perhaps Ms. de Bellefeuille could continue. Well, I'll wait until you get your earpiece in for the interpretation. At my age, I'm slow. Okay. So what I was saying was that I was reading the note to explain the fact, to explain why the French notice was issued several minutes after the one that was issued in English, or some people did not receive it at all. So I saw your note, and I considered that what you said was that everything has now currently been put in place to ensure that if ever there was another alert of this nature, that regardless of the language of the person receiving it, they would receive it at the same time. Could you confirm to me that that is true? Okay, thank you. So I thank you very much for the note. So, Mr. Chairman, I had several questions concerning the committee dashboard, but I don't know, perhaps I could ask people to come to the table first. So first of all, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to congratulate the whole team. I know that this work on the dashboard is one that requires a lot of follow-up and a lot of work, but it's very useful. We all, as organizations, everyone needs to have this kind of information, and the dashboard plays that role. So I have 2 questions, essentially. On graph number 1, every page says page 2, so I can't give you the page number, but we'll go by graph numbers. So number 1, When I look at the month of May 2022, so let's take that as an example, what I see is that there were 214 witnesses that didn't do preliminary tests, 35 that didn't come to the pretest, and 19 who were unable or who failed the pretest. So I think that's quite a few witnesses. And my first question, therefore, is what happens? Those people, because I don't have this information, did all of these people testify in the end? And if they did, could you explain to me, when there's a pretest, what is the process? Who participates in those pretests? Who says what to whom? And who decides in the end that a witness cannot testify, given, for example, the various criteria that we have to allow for proper interpretation with quality interpretation? Perhaps I could start, and then my colleague could talk a little bit more about the process for the pretests. Could you speak to the microphone, please? Thank you. Is that better? Yes. The first thing to mention, perhaps, is that for the pretests, for the month of May, we know that we had several hundred witnesses who did not appear before the committee. It was the Finance Committee. I think there were some 100 witnesses that were there who were connected to the meeting, but we knew that there was a good chance that they would not be able to testify. So the statistics for the month of May, I think we mentioned in June, are perhaps not the best representation of our process, generally speaking. And perhaps the second remark I could make is that if we look at the month of June, there were fewer people, there were no pretest failures, so we do our best to do the test just before the meeting and even do a second check if we can, and we can see the results for the month of June. The other thing perhaps to mention is that in these cases, when there's a second test just before the meeting, we find that we can, at that point in time, we have a very good idea if we're going to have a problem or not and can solve it. We find that most of the time, 60% of the time, when we have witnesses that did not do the pretests, we find that a good 60% are invited less than 3 days ahead of time, and therefore we know that we haven't really had enough time. But when we do the test just before the meeting, we find that 90% of the tests will be successful. So we don't really have a problem, but it's because of the fact that we have a whole process through which we do the pretests, and we have to make sure that the great majority are tested in advance, that everything's fine. And there is a less significant number of people that we have to test at the last minute. And we find that the results, generally speaking, as I said, about 90% will pass that pretest, and there's no problem when they testify. So, Mr. Chairman, as another question, the witness presents himself and fails the pretest just a few hours before the meeting is to start. So it's very clear that if that person will be a witness, there is a negative effect on the interpreter and also on the testimony, because they'll be interrupted, and it's a burden for the MP that doesn't speak the language who has to interrupt the testimony. So can you tell me who decides that a witness who failed the test can testify in any case? Inaudible? It's a decision the committee must take. If at the last minute we see that there's a significant problem and that it's going to cause difficulties, and we know that it's possible that there will be cases that we haven't been able to identify, but in the great majority of cases, the IT person will inform the clerk, who will inform the chair of the committee or the members of the committee, depending on the situation. Because sometimes we do those tests with the whole committee present. because it's clear there are members in the house or in the room just before the meeting, and we can see during those tests. That's normally in the 15 minutes just before the meeting will start rather. Do you consider that there is a standardized process, or is there a great deal of latitude left to the clerk and the chair? Because, there are few chairs that respect the routine motion to tell the members of the committee before each meeting begins who has passed the pretest or who has failed it. And I've sat at many committee meetings, and few committee chairs do this. So what I'm trying to find out, Mr. McDonald, is that there seems to be a great deal of latitude between the clerk and the chair, and the members are not informed of who has failed a pretest or not. So I'll bring you to a specific example, and perhaps you will be able to explain this to my colleagues. On the 26th of September, at Aboriginal Affairs Committee, Indigenous Affairs, there was a test, a witness who had failed the test. The clerk was informed of this, but what's not clear is whether the clerk informed the chair, yes or no. And currently, I've been given two different responses to this question. Maybe you know the real answer. And if the chair was aware, why did he keep that testimony, witness rather, in line, knowing that that testimony would be a failure because there wasn't quality sound for the interpreters? And that causes problems to the interpreter as well. And it puts the burden on the Bloc Québécois member to interrupt while the person's testifying. So what I'm trying to find out is that there doesn't seem to be a standardized process, that there's a great deal of room for improvisation or to see what the wishes of the chair are. So in this case, how can you allow a witness to testify when we know in advance that it's going to be a failure? So can you explain to me somewhat what this process really is? Well, if it's clearly going to be a failure, I know that we've taken the time these last few days to speak with all of the committee clerks and even to communicate in writing of the importance of informing the chair if there is a problem with a witness. So whether it's a connectivity problem or the ability of the witness to join the meeting with quality sound. We've already begun this process, and we have to remind our clerks about that. I think it's important for us that we inform the committee chairs, and I think it's up to them with their committee to look at these issues. The clerks are not the right people to take a decision as to whether a witness can appear or not. It is always up to the committee to take the decision. The clerk can advise us of the fact that there is a problem, and it will always be a committee decision. But still always with respecting the Official Languages Act and to ensure that there is interpretation both for the members and for witnesses and for the public that are watching the committee meetings. All right, so what I understand is that there was a meeting with the clerks to make them aware of this, because I see a big difference between informing a chair of a problem or advising the chair. So I don't know if this is information that was sent or advice was given, but certainly the chair did not inform the members and of this pretest failure. So I would not like as whip to find ourselves at the next meeting here of a different example. We should be able to correct our way of functioning now, and we cannot allow witnesses to testify who have failed the pretest. It's clear, it should be clear to IT and to the chair. And the chair, if he didn't or she didn't share this information with the committee members, the committee couldn't make that decision. For me, that's the important nuance. So we always like to have a clear example, Mr. McDonald, to correct our procedures. I think this example is a good one for everyone. And everyone has to look at themselves and say, what is the right thing to do here to avoid this situation being ever repeated? So if I don't want to abuse of your kindness, but you know that this dashboard is a passion for me. Could you tell me why were we limited, the government whip and myself, to work together in order to avoid that an informal committee meeting be held? We had said at the last meeting here that it didn't exist. We didn't have that. Such a thing doesn't exist. Informal meetings to substitute the requirement to have a meeting with both official languages. So can you tell us publicly, we think that that's the last time that the members of a committee were called to an informal meeting held in a single language. This time it was in English, because we think that the whips agreed that that was unacceptable. Yes, that was a mistake on our part, and we apologize for that. As we said in the springtime, we don't want that to ever happen again. And once again, we had discussions with our staff to talk about the need during each meeting that we're involved in, that we need to have interpretation. That's part of the services that we offer. Also, just to go back to the issue that you referred to earlier, informing rather than advising, and we certainly talk about advising the chair. That applies in both cases. That's the advice that we give, and we will continue to say that clearly in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, thank Madame de Bellefeuille. Then we'll continue with Mr. Julian. I thought I saw your hand up. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd also like to ask our Sergeant at Arms to come back. There's a place available for him. If he can come back to the table.
Parce que j'ai une question pour vous.
Because I have a question for you, but also I have questions for Mr. McDonald and Mr. Obey. First of all, when we're talking about this incident where the alert was sent out in English, and then several minutes later it was sent in French, I know that there's a protocol that was put in place, and I'd like just to hear more of the details. Does that mean that all alerts that are sent will be sent in both official languages, or is there a protocol in place that means that alerts sent in English and alerts sent in French will be sent at the same time? Because as you know, it's an issue of health and safety that's extremely important.
All is, Mr. Julian, they'll be sent in English and in French at the same time. And that's what our community related to us when we were building this emergency notification system. And they didn't want to have to wade through one language to get to the content of their first language, the message. It is an emergency after all. So in this particular case, I'll go into a bit of detail. The operator didn't have the template for the message he wanted to send. That template wasn't developed yet. And it didn't go through the governance structure to be approved. So the operator, who was busy managing the incident, at the same time composed the message in English, got busy again, approximately 6 minutes passed, composed in French, then pressed the button. Even with the new protocol that English and French will go out at the same time, and that's what it has been actually for all our messages, English and French at the same time. 5,000 to 6,000 messages or more will go out when you press the button. So it's all computerized. They're trying to find a line. So we could all be in this room. You may receive a message 1 minute before I receive a message, or vice versa, because they're finding lines to get out, finding the network. But the delay of 6 or 7 minutes is totally unacceptable. So we've addressed that.
Ça veut dire que le protocole va.
That means that the protocol will ensure that they are both sent out at exactly the same time? Yes. And now we are training the operators of the system with Stéphane Audet team to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. Perfect.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And now I'll go to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Obey. And as Ms. de Bellefeuille, I thank you very much for the dashboard. When we're talking about kind of headsets and the number that were provided by the House of Commons, 30 were not. This 30%, I'd like to know of that 30%, how many of the witnesses were not able to testify because there was such a poor quality of sound? I don't think we have that information with us. The reason why we can't always send headsets is because we don't have enough time to do so. But it will take more time to find that specific information. We'll look for it and get back to you with it. Super, thank you. I think that will be very useful to know when there are problems. Thank you very much. We will certainly find that information and share it with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, for point number 2, are there any other questions or comments? Ms. de Bellefeuille. On number 2, I think there is the study, the audio system performance. So I wanted to talk about the audio system performance evaluation. Is that on point 2? Am I mistaken? Is that correct? Yes, it was distributed for the information of members, but if you have a question. No, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say, because we are in public now, I wanted to thank you. There are conclusions that have been drawn from the study in order to be able to analyze the problems that were identified. For myself, I'm quite happy that we have these conclusions to be able to understand. And I also understand, Mr. Chairman, that we find ourselves with 2 studies that didn't use the same methodology and technology, so that might not provide us with the same conclusions. There's a whole issue of thesis, antithesis, and given the wealth of the 2 studies that we have, it demonstrates the need to find solutions in collaboration with the Translation Bureau. And what I wish to see is that all of the researchers at the National Research Council, as well as any others, the world specialist who worked on this too, is that all of these parties sit together and agree on conclusions to continue the improvements that we have tried to make so far. That is my wish. I know that there's a lot of work that was done on that. Perhaps we could let Mr. Obey speak and tell us what's happened until now and the negotiations that are underway. That's a very good question, Madame de Bellefeuille. And to answer quickly, it's exactly what our plan is. In October, we'll have a 3rd series of meetings. And you know, we've been working on this report since the month of January. We've worked with different people from the Translation Bureau, the NRC as well, and also to be able to well understand the NRC's initial report, because we wanted to react to the issues that were identified by the Translation Bureau through the NRC. So now we've created an action plan, we've made recommendations, new microphones, for example, the new headsets, and we are also making recommendations for the interpreter headsets, because those seem to be the 2 major issues. So I say that and telling you that these tests are done in an environment that is perfect. We're not depending on the internet. We're not dealing with a remote site. And when we do tests on our systems within the house, we have this virtual system. The components of the system here aren't what causes problems. So we've talked about this with the Translation Bureau and the NRC. We talked about the tests that we did during the break week with them, and we're going to carry on with that with them, and to find the why that there are different conclusions drawn from the two different studies. Thank you. Mr. Julian. Thank you very much. I also want to echo the others saying that it is so important to put these systems, the appropriate ones, in place. I know there's a great deal of work that's being done, and we have to constantly seek to improve our systems. The new report will be sent to us in the next weeks. Is there a date where that will be tabled? It will be submitted to the members of the Board of Internal Economy, Mr. Julian, but however, we are asking you to keep it secret for the moment. We don't want it circulated. We need to have direct discussions with the NRC before we find ourselves with two documents heading in two different directions concerning interpretation. So we want to have a meeting with them and go through our conclusions together. If necessary, we will make it public later. Thank you, Mr. Julian.
OK, nous allons passer au point.
We're going to move to point number 3, the audited financial statements for 2021-2022. We have Paul Saint-Georges, Mr. Fernandez, Mr. Newman, and Mr. Généreux.
Monsieur Saint-Georges, je vous laisse la parole.
Mr. Saint-Georges, I give you the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to report on the audited financial statements for the fiscal year March 31st, 2022, which were prepared in accordance with the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. This document is one of the financial reports presented to the House of Commons administration, or by the House of Commons for the purposes of monitoring the financial activities of the House of Commons. As part of the financial report cycle, the board received the financial report in June for the end of the non-audited fiscal year ending 2021-22, which presented official expenditures of $510 million. The purpose of the report was to compare actual expenditures at the end of the fiscal year with spending authorities and to report on the budgeting discrepancies.
Authorities' perspective, in the audited financial statements, the expenditures remain unchanged from the $510 million previously reported to you. However, the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards requires the board to account for other items such as services received without charge. These total $103 million, and other non-cash items as well, bringing the total net cost operations to $608 million. Other notable reports in the package include the balance sheet, statement of changes in net debt, and statement of cash flows. The financial statements are audited each year by an independent external auditor, which is currently KPMG, and as in previous years, we have received an unqualified audit report. I'll now pass the floor to Andrew Newman from KPMG to present the audit results. The board will then have the opportunity to speak to the auditors in camera following that presentation.
Thank you. I am Andrew Newman. I am the independent auditor of the House of Commons, and my role is to provide an opinion on the external financial statements in accordance with Canadian auditing standards. Thank you for this opportunity to present our audit opinion on the 2022 financial statements and provide a brief summary of the conduct of our audit. I would like to introduce my colleague, Jonathan Généreux, the audit manager for the audit. The Chief Financial Officer has presented to this board the 2020 financial statements, which management has prepared using public sector accounting standards. Public sector accounting standards are used by all governments in Canada and are issued by the Public Sector Accounting Board, upon which I served as a member and vice chair for 12 years. Our role as your independent auditors is to obtain reasonable assurance about whether these financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement. The 2022 financial statement audit began with the development of our audit plan, which was based on multiple discussions with management. Our year-end audit was executed in accordance with that plan. During our audit, we received full participation from the House management team and employees. All of our questions were answered. All of the required supporting documentation received, and all issues were satisfactorily resolved. We have completed our audit and issued our audit opinion on July 7th, 2022, in our independent auditor's report attached to the statements. That opinion states that the financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the House of Commons as at March 31st, 2022, and its results of operations, its accumulated surplus, and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. And that concludes my report.
Do we have any questions? Est-ce que nous avons des questions, commentaires?
Questions or comments?
Seeing none, I want to thank you, Mr. St. George, Mr. Fernandez, Mr. Newman, and Mr. Généreux. I understand that it's normal and good governance to practice for independent auditors to have a discussion in camera with board members without management present regarding the preparation of the year-end audited financial statements. I would therefore like to propose to board members that we hold a short in-camera session without the House administration officials to allow board members to have this discussion. Do I have acceptance of the members to proceed in camera? Yes? Very good. Thank you. What we'll do is we'll take a short break to transition in. At this time, I'll ask the House Administration's officials to exit the room, both in person and virtually. Once the discussion is complete, those in person will be summoned back into the room, and those virtually will receive an email summoning them back to rejoin us in the room.